At 6 a.m. on a Wednesday that would redefine the word scandal, every creative platform on Earth went dark simultaneously. YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, streaming services, digital art marketplaces, everything artists used to reach audiences disappeared within minutes. But this wasn't a technical failure or cyber attack. It was Viktor Petrov's final move. While we had been fighting for hearts and minds, he had been quietly buying the infrastructure that hearts and minds depend on to communicate with the world. And now, with one coordinated action, he had just silenced every independent creative voice on the planet. The message was simple. Psychological manipulation was the gentle approach. What came next was absolute power. Marie burst into my apartment at dawn, her face pale with panic and her phone buzzing with emergency notifications from creative communities worldwide. Every platform is down. Everything. Artists can't upload, share, sell, or even communicate about their work. I tried accessing our underground networks through encrypted channels, but those were down too. The sophisticated communication systems that had allowed global creative collaboration had been systematically eliminated overnight. This isn't just platform outages, I realized, studying the pattern of failures. Someone has coordinated a complete shutdown of digital creative infrastructure. Within hours, the scope became clear. Viktor hadn't just attacked social media platforms. He had targeted the fundamental systems that modern creativity depends on. Cloud storage services where artists kept their work, payment processing systems that allowed creative sales, communication networks that enabled collaboration, and distribution platforms that connected creators with audiences. He's not trying to control creativity, Marie said, reading reports from around the world. He's trying to make creativity impossible. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Artists who had spent years building audiences, developing online businesses, and creating digital communities found themselves completely cut off from the infrastructure their creative lives required. Catherine Sterling arrived with intelligence reports that explained how Viktor had achieved something that should have been impossible: simultaneous control of competing platforms owned by rival corporations across multiple countries with different regulatory systems. Shell companies, she explained, spreading corporate structure diagrams across my kitchen table. For 5 years, Viktor has been acquiring minority stakes in every major creative platform through thousands of shell companies and offshore investment vehicles. The financial architecture was breathtaking in its complexity. Viktor didn't own controlling interests in YouTube, Instagram, or Spotify. But he owned enough distributed shares to coordinate temporary shutdowns when combined with strategic cyber attacks on systems he couldn't purchase. He doesn't need to own the platforms permanently. He just needs to control them long enough to demonstrate that creative independence is impossible without infrastructure cooperation. The documents showed Viktor's network had also acquired key suppliers to creative industries, the companies that manufactured cameras, musical instruments, art supplies, and production equipment, the cloud servers that stored digital work, the payment processors that enabled creative commerce. Creative freedom is meaningless if you can't access the tools creativity requires, I realized. Exactly. And Viktor controls the supply chain that produces those tools. Viktor's terms arrived at noon through every available communication channel: traditional media, government networks, corporate announcements, and emergency broadcast systems. He had bypassed the creative platforms he controlled to ensure his message reached everyone affected by their shutdown. Global creative communities have 24 hours to accept new terms for platform access. All independent creative work must be submitted for approval before publication. All creative content must comply with community standards that promote social stability and economic cooperation. All creative individuals must register with approved professional organizations that ensure quality control and appropriate messaging. The demands were comprehensive and crushing. Not just content moderation, but complete creative pre-approval. Not just platform rules, but mandatory professional licensing for artistic expression. Furthermore, underground creative networks and informal artistic collaborations are now classified as unlicensed creative activities subject to immediate platform bans and legal action. Viktor was demanding the complete elimination of creative independence in exchange for restoration of the infrastructure creative independence had been using to flourish. Accept these terms, and creative platforms will be restored within 6 hours. Reject these terms, and creative infrastructure will be permanently eliminated. The psychological warfare was elegant and brutal. He was giving creative communities the choice between submission and silence. The response from underground creative networks was swift, coordinated, and completely unexpected. Instead of submitting to Viktor's demands or accepting digital silence, artists worldwide went analog. Within hours, cities across the globe saw something that hadn't existed since the pre-digital era: physical creative communities occupying public spaces, musicians performing on street corners, visual artists creating installations in parks, writers reading work aloud in town squares, theaters staging performances in abandoned buildings. They're not just continuing to create, Marie observed, watching live streams from Catherine's secure communication network. They're creating better work because they're forced to connect directly with live audiences. The digital shutdown had accidentally inspired a renaissance of physical creative performance. Artists who had spent years building online audiences were discovering that face-to-face connection generated more powerful emotional responses than digital engagement. But the most significant development was economic. Without digital platforms taking percentage cuts from creative sales, artists were keeping 100% of revenue from direct transactions with audiences who experienced their work in person. Viktor eliminated digital creative infrastructure to force artists back under institutional control, I realized. Instead, he's pushed them into creating more profitable and more authentic alternatives. As the global creative strike entered its second day, governments worldwide faced a crisis they hadn't anticipated. Citizens in major cities were gathering in public spaces for artistic performances that were generating massive crowds, economic activity, and cultural conversations that bypassed traditional media entirely. The political implications were immediate. When people gathered for shared creative experiences, they naturally began discussing other shared concerns: economic inequality, political representation, social issues that digital platforms had been systematically suppressing through algorithmic content control. Street art doesn't have comment sections, Marie noted. It has conversations between real people in physical spaces. And those conversations are more dangerous to existing power structures than anything that happens online. Reports from around the world showed that the creative strike was evolving into something broader: community organizing around local issues, political discussions that weren't shaped by digital manipulation, and economic cooperation that didn't require corporate platform mediation. Viktor's shutdown of digital creative infrastructure has accidentally eliminated digital social control mechanisms, Catherine observed. People are communicating without algorithmic manipulation for the first time in 15 years. Within 48 hours of the digital shutdown, major corporations were demanding restoration of creative platforms with unprecedented urgency. But their motivation wasn't supporting artistic freedom, it was economic survival. Advertising revenue has collapsed, Catherine explained, showing financial reports from major tech companies. When creative platforms go dark, advertising platforms go dark. And when advertising platforms go dark, the entire digital economy collapses. The economic interdependence was more complex than Viktor had calculated. Creative content wasn't just entertainment that could be eliminated without consequences. It was the foundation of digital engagement that drove all online economic activity. E-commerce depends on social media marketing. Social media marketing depends on creative content. Creative content depends on artists. By eliminating artists' access to platforms, Viktor has accidentally crashed the entire digital advertising economy. Stock markets worldwide were experiencing crashes as investors realized that digital economic growth required creative content production. Without artists creating engaging material, audiences weren't using platforms. Without platform engagement, advertising wasn't effective. Without advertising effectiveness, digital marketing budgets were being eliminated. The corporate executives who supported Viktor's plan to control creative independence are now demanding he restore creative platforms before their businesses collapse completely. While mainstream attention focused on the economic crisis caused by digital platform shutdowns, underground creative networks were making a discovery that changed everything about how creative independence could function permanently. "We don't need their infrastructure," reported James Chen, a musician who had become a coordinator for underground creative communities in 12 countries. Physical creative communities are more economically efficient than digital ones. The economic analysis was compelling. Without platform fees, payment processing costs, and advertising expenses, direct creative sales generated higher profits with smaller audiences. Artists needed fewer customers to generate sustainable incomes when they eliminated corporate intermediaries. Street performances generate more revenue per audience member than streaming. Physical art sales generate higher profits than digital marketplace sales. Live collaborative work creates stronger professional relationships than online networking. But the most significant discovery was cultural. Audiences were willing to pay premium prices for direct creative experiences that couldn't be replicated through digital consumption. People will pay €50 for a live concert they could stream for free because live performance creates emotional connections that digital reproduction can't match. The underground creative economy was becoming more prosperous than the digital creative economy had ever been. On the fourth day of Viktor's digital shutdown, Catherine's intelligence network made a discovery that explained everything about how the infrastructure attack had been planned and why it was already failing. "Hidden server farms," she explained, showing satellite imagery of facilities in remote locations across 6 countries. Viktor has been building parallel creative infrastructure for 2 years, preparing to offer it as an alternative once he destroyed existing platforms. The facilities were enormous. Data centers, content production studios, and communication networks designed to replace every creative platform he had shut down. but with one crucial difference: complete content control integrated into the infrastructure itself. Artists would get their creative tools back, but only if they accepted permanent oversight of everything they created. But the secret vault contained something Viktor hadn't expected: evidence that his infrastructure control plan was illegal under international law. Treaties prohibiting monopolistic control of communication systems. Regulations requiring platform neutrality. Laws that made coordinated shutdown of creative infrastructure a form of economic terrorism. We have everything needed to not just restore creative platforms, but to prosecute Viktor for international economic crimes. However, Catherine's final revelation was more complex. But prosecuting Viktor means accepting government control of creative infrastructure instead of corporate control. Legal victory means regulatory victory, not creative freedom. Standing in my apartment on the 5th day of global creative platform shutdown, I faced a choice that would determine the future of human creativity worldwide. 3 options, none of them satisfactory. Accept Viktor's terms, restore digital creative platforms under his control, and return creative communities to systematic oversight and pre-approval processes that would eliminate authentic independence. Prosecute Viktor using international law, restore digital creative platforms under government regulatory control, and accept that creative communities would be subject to political oversight instead of corporate oversight. Reject both digital infrastructure restoration options, support the development of permanent analog creative communities, and accept that creative independence required abandoning the technological tools that had made global creative collaboration possible. There has to be a 4th option, Marie said. Something that gives creative communities control of their own infrastructure instead of choosing between corporate control and government control. What would that look like? Artists owning the platforms they use instead of being subject to platforms owned by others. The concept was revolutionary and apparently impossible. Creative communities developing their own technological infrastructure, owning their own communication networks, controlling their own economic systems. That would require resources, technical expertise, and coordination on a scale that creative communities have never achieved. Unless, Catherine said quietly, creative communities have been developing exactly those capabilities through 5 days of analog collaboration and economic cooperation. The proposal that emerged from underground creative networks worldwide was so audacious, it initially seemed like fantasy. Artists would buy Viktor's infrastructure when his illegal manipulation tactics forced him to sell assets to pay international legal penalties. Collective ownership, explained Elena Rodriguez, a Spanish filmmaker who had become a coordinator for European creative communities. Every artist who participates contributes what they can and owns a proportional share of the platforms they use. The financial model was based on the economic success of analog creative communities during the digital shutdown. Artists had discovered they could generate higher revenues through direct sales, which meant they could afford to invest in purchasing the infrastructure needed for digital collaboration. Instead of paying platform fees forever, we pay infrastructure costs once and own the systems permanently. The technical requirements seemed overwhelming until underground creative networks revealed how much expertise they had developed through years of creating informal collaboration systems. We have programmers, designers, engineers, business analysts, and marketing specialists in our creative communities. We don't need to hire corporate consultants to build creative platforms. We can build them ourselves. Viktor's response to the artist ownership proposal was swift and vicious. Instead of accepting legal consequences for his illegal infrastructure manipulation, he attempted to destroy the server facilities and technological systems rather than allow them to be purchased by creative communities. If I can't control creative infrastructure, no one will have access to it, he announced through emergency broadcasts on the few communication networks still functioning. The destruction began immediately. Explosions at server farms, cyber attacks on remaining functional platforms, and what appeared to be systematic elimination of technological infrastructure that supported any form of creative communication. But Viktor had underestimated how much creative communities had learned about resilience, cooperation, and survival during 5 days of forced analog collaboration. We don't need his infrastructure, I realized, watching footage of server farms burning while street art festivals flourished in cities worldwide. We've already proven that creative communities can survive and prosper without digital platforms. The final confrontation wasn't between corporate control and creative independence. It was between technological dependence and cultural self-sufficiency. As Viktor's technological infrastructure burned, something unprecedented emerged from the ashes. Creative communities that were economically stronger, culturally more authentic, and politically more independent than any digital creative network had ever achieved. The shutdown was supposed to prove that creative independence was impossible without corporate infrastructure, Marie observed. Instead, it proved that corporate infrastructure was making creative independence impossible. Artists worldwide had discovered that direct relationships with audiences were more profitable than platform-mediated relationships. That physical creative collaboration was more satisfying than digital networking. That community ownership of creative resources was more sustainable than corporate ownership. Viktor destroyed his own argument, I realized. He tried to demonstrate that artists needed corporate control to access audiences. Instead, he demonstrated that corporate control was preventing artists from accessing audiences effectively. The underground creative revolution had evolved beyond seeking reform of existing systems. It had created alternative systems that made existing systems obsolete. 6 months after Viktor's infrastructure attack, the global creative economy looked completely different. Cities worldwide had developed creative districts where artists owned the spaces, controlled the economic systems, and determined the cultural standards for their communities. Digital platforms existed, but they were owned and operated by the creative communities that used them. Instead of being subject to corporate content policies, artists collectively determined community guidelines that supported authentic creative expression. We didn't just achieve creative independence, I said, standing in the Paris Creative District where thousands of artists lived, worked, and collaborated in spaces they collectively owned. We achieved creative sovereignty. The economic impact was transformational. Artists who had struggled to generate sustainable incomes under corporate platform systems were thriving in community-owned creative economies. Audiences who had been manipulated by algorithmic content promotion were discovering work that reflected genuine human creativity instead of manufactured engagement optimization. Viktor was right about one thing, Marie noted. Infrastructure control is more powerful than content control. That's why creative communities owning their own infrastructure is revolutionary. Walking through the Paris Creative District at sunset, I reflected on everything that had led from a scholarship to fashion school to the establishment of global creative sovereignty. The journey had cost me my innocence, my ability to trust easily, and my belief that individual talent could succeed without community support. But it had given me something more valuable, understanding that creative freedom wasn't something that could be granted by institutions or protected by regulations. It was something that existed when creative communities had the power to determine their own conditions. Do you ever regret how this all turned out? Marie asked as we watched artists preparing for evening performances in venues they collectively owned. I regret the manipulation, the betrayals, the years of fighting battles I didn't understand. But I don't regret where the fighting led. The creative district around us buzzed with activity that had nothing to do with seeking approval from corporate gatekeepers or government regulators. Artists created because they wanted to create. Audiences engaged because they wanted genuine cultural experiences. Economic exchange happened because it served both creators and consumers. This is what creative freedom actually looks like, I realized. Not the absence of systems, but systems designed by and for creative communities instead of systems imposed on creative communities. As the sun set over the Paris Creative District, a message appeared on the community communication network that connected artist-owned creative communities worldwide. Not from Viktor. His network had been eliminated through legal prosecution and community resistance. This message came from someone new. Congratulations on achieving creative sovereignty. Your success has been noted by interests that operate on scales beyond corporate or government control. Creative independence is a beautiful achievement. But independence in one sector of human activity tends to inspire independence in other sectors. Economic independence. Political independence. Social independence. Some people view this as positive cultural evolution. Others view it as dangerous disruption of essential control systems. You have 60 days to demonstrate that creative sovereignty can coexist peacefully with existing global power structures. Or you will discover what happens when creative communities must choose between their independence and their survival. This is not a threat. This is information about a choice you will soon face. Representatives of interests that prefer stability to evolution. I looked around the thriving creative district, where artists were performing, collaborating, and building something unprecedented in human history. We had won every battle for creative freedom. We had achieved creative sovereignty on a global scale. But apparently, creative freedom was just the beginning of a larger confrontation about human independence itself. Some victories are endings. Others are qualifications for the next level of the game. We were about to find out which kind of victory we had achieved. Next episode preview. We built something beautiful. Creative communities that own their own infrastructure, control their own economies, and determine their own cultural standards. But success in one area of human freedom apparently threatens power structures in all areas. Now we face a choice that goes beyond creativity. Prove that independence can coexist with existing systems, or defend independence against forces we never imagined we would have to fight. The revolution that started with stolen fashion designs is about to become something much larger and more dangerous. The final test is coming.